Welcome to, or welcome back to, the Agatha May Detective Agency. I'm Agatha May, and I'm so glad you've joined me for our final, at least final for now, episode in Kadie Major tracking down her killer. In our last episode, we looked at the evidence that was discovered in the case, and in this episode, we'll look at the investigators that worked on the case, the ones who completely bungled it and may have made it impossible for there to ever be justice in Kadie's case. If you need to get caught up on the case, I'll have a link in the description box below to the playlist. So, the first law enforcement officer I want to talk about for just a minute is the guy that served as the Berkeley County Sheriff at the time. His name was Wayne DeWitt. He doesn't show up in this case, at least not what I can find, but I still think there are a few things we should know about him. He was the sheriff from 1995 until he resigned in 2015. And you know why he resigned? Because he was arrested on 12/28/2014 for a hit-and-run accident, a DUI, and failing to stop for police. But he didn't just fail to stop, he also took a little joyride, going 100 miles an hour with the police chasing him. At his hearing, Wayne told the judge how sorry he was. Quote, "I reiterate how sorry I am for my actions and the poor choices I made," end quote. He was sentenced to 30 days in jail, but they were suspended on the completion of 3 years probation and 60 hours of community service, meaning he didn't have to serve any jail time as long as he completed the probation and the community service. But I guess the apology that Wayne gave to the court had an expiration date, because old Wayne was arrested again on October 18th, 2022 for a DUI and an open container. He refused to take a field sobriety test at the scene. From what I can tell, he was only given a fine for his second DUI, and the charges were changed from a second offense of a DUI to a first offense. I'm not sure people who weren't ever the sheriff somewhere are able to get two first offenses and get by with only having to pay a fine for their second first offense. I'm not saying that the sheriff's department did a crap job on investigating Kadie and River's deaths because of who their leader was, but then I'm also not saying it either. With that kind of leader, who's actually going to take their job seriously? And I wouldn't be surprised if Wayne was ever a little tipsy on the job. The lead investigator on Kadie's case was Rick, I can't recall, Olick. And I think Rick just completely mucked up the entire investigation. He seemed to have had it in his mind that Kadie committed suicide, and that's all there was to it. In the 48 Hours episode about Kadie's case, Rick said that his team, quote, unturned everything that could be unturned, end quote. Unfortunately for Rick, the pages of his dictionary also remained unturned, or he'd know that unturned isn't a verb. Forgive my pedantry, for Rick committed much larger sins, such as never questioning Kadie's parents or any of her friends. He never questioned Kadie's OBGYN either. So he only took her husband Aaron's word for it, that Kadie was having some kind of psychotic break and was paranoid about everyone and everything. Had he asked anyone else, they would have told him that they never saw any evidence of Kadie being depressed, paranoid, or psychotic. And while she might have been able to disguise her depression somewhat, paranoia and psychosis are a little more difficult for someone to hide. And not only did Rick not interview Kadie's family, but when her mother sent him multiple emails about Kadie's case, he never answered a single one. And when he was asked about it later, he used his usual response of, I don't recall. As we've talked about before, Rick's theory was that something hanging off the side of the train hit Kadie, and that she was holding River, who was thrown into the water and drowned. In order for Kadie's death to be ruled a suicide, she had to have purposely ran into the side of the train. And if she was holding River at the time, then River's death should have been ruled a homicide instead of undetermined. And if Kadie didn't run into the train but merely got too close to it, then her death and River's should both be accidental. I don't understand how Kadie's death is ruled a suicide, but River's is still undetermined. Then again, I'm not convinced that Kadie was hit by the train. When Kadie and River were killed, Rick worked for the Berkeley County Sheriff's Department, and in 2015 he ran for Berkeley County Sheriff and he lost. During his campaign, citizens of the county were being spammed with emails from Rick. When they started looking into how he had gotten their email addresses, they discovered that they all had something in common. They were all parents with students at one of the Monck's corner schools, and it just so happened that a close relative of Rick's worked at that school. And I'm sure it was just a coincidence and not that relative grabbing email addresses for Rick's campaign. In 2016, he was hired as the chief of police in Moncks Corner. And I'm guessing they didn't have anyone else who wanted the job because that's the only reason I can think of as to why he would get it. In 2020, Rick and the police department were sued. They had wrongfully arrested someone, and it was someone who needed medication because he had had a previous stroke. But they would not allow him to take his medication to jail with him. And he was there for 10 days and was never allowed his medication. And while he was in jail, he had another stroke or similar ischemic attack, which more than likely could have been avoided had he had his medication. The lawsuit was settled. And Rick and the PD were sued again in 2020 for gender and racial discrimination. Thelma Lewis had worked for the police department since 2004 and stated that once Rick became the police department chief, he began discriminating against her as well as using racial slurs and calling her derogatory names. That lawsuit was also settled between the two parties. According to a WCSC article published on July 7, 2021, Rick was placed on probation for substandard work performance. Part of the reason for that probation was because SLED had arrested a former Moncks Corner SRO named Cedric Smalls on charges of criminal sexual conduct with a minor. Corporal Randall Scott, who was also with the Moncks Corner Police Department, was also arrested for allegedly taking monetary bribes for him to dismiss traffic tickets. According to reports, Rick knew about the misconduct of his officers and failed to ever discipline them, and it doesn't look as though he really even ever discussed it with him. Well, he discussed it with Cedric Smalls enough to just move him to a new school. Yep, in Rick's world, if one of your SROs is having sex with a 15-year-old student, then the best recourse is just to move the officer to a different school. His probation only lasted 2 weeks. I'll bet that taught him a lesson, huh? The article also mentioned that while Rick started his stint as police chief with a yearly salary of $66,246, by March of 2021, he was making a yearly salary of over $109,000. Now, those are some pretty decent raises. Rick retired in 2022 and seemed to do so in a hurry. The police department announced his retirement before they had ever filled the position for police chief. And with his history of scandals, I wonder if retiring was a choice he made or if it was made for him. One of the other investigators in Kadie's case was Brian the Spatula Mosier. He's the investigator that took Aaron's initial statement, and he is also the one who lost his SHIT when Kadie's uncle called and told him he had questions. Spatula Mosier was irate. And if you haven't listened to that recording, I'll have a link to it in the description, and I've also shared it in the Facebook group. So if this is how Brian Mosier treats the family of someone who's died, I'd hate to think how he treats just everyday people. He actually threatened to have the uncle charged with harassment. Answering questions for a family is part of your job, you unripe walnut. I think maybe Bry Guy is so defensive of the case because he knows he did a horrible job investigating it. And then we have Jerry Tippy Toes Merrithew, and he was another of the investigators, and he's the one who had the little chin wag with Aaron a week after Kadie died. Did he hit with the hard questions? No. And did he confront Aaron when he caught him in a lie or a contradiction? No. He just sat there with his legs stretched out, bouncing his heels on the floor, which kind of made him look like a toddler. Here are a few questions I wish old Jer Bear would have asked Aaron. How did you hurt your hand? When did you hurt your hand? Why didn't you take Kadie to the ER when she started acting paranoid? Why did it take you until almost 2 in the morning before you contacted her parents? What made you think that that wouldn't be the first place that she would have gone? And if you thought she had left her house and thought she was psychotic, why didn't you call the police to have them look for her? How did you know the exact spot Kadie was found? And how did you know there was a bridge there if you didn't walk all the way down the railroad tracks? And then I'd ask him about all the discrepancies between his initial statement and the interview. Dwayne Lewis was elected as the new sheriff of Berkeley County in 2015, and Kadie's mother was able to approach him with evidence. And in 2019, he created a task force to look at Kadie's case. Kadie's mother had hired a private investigator, and between the two of them, they had a pile of evidence for the investigators. One of the most interesting pieces of information was that the same morning that Kadie and River were found, Aaron had made an internet search for two dead in Berkeley County, and this was before their bodies were ever found. The private investigator also found computer searches for 9/11 conspiracy theories and the Jeremiah Project, which I guess is a website that talks about a new world order and the end times. And these searches were made when Aaron was home alone. So it wasn't Kadie that was looking at the conspiracy theories. I've mentioned before that Aaron's mother asked Kadie's mother to please not tell the detectives about Aaron talking about the conspiracy theories because she didn't want people to think they were religious nuts. Well, how about just plain old nuts without dragging religion into it? In the 48 Hours episode about Kadie's case, the deputy assigned to the case said that he was a little apprehensive about talking to Kadie's mother for the first time because he'd heard she was doolally. But once he got her in the office and started listening to her, he realized she was entirely sane and the questions she was asking were completely logical. So I think the problem was those detective fellas that had initially investigated the case, not Kadie's family. There were timelines that didn't match, Aaron's statements didn't match, people weren't questioned, and the train that actually hit Kadie, if it was a train, was never identified. The new investigators ruled out Kadie's death being a suicide. They also named Aaron Major as their main suspect. But nothing has been done since. Another 6 years and nothing has happened. This has been one of the most discouraging cases I've covered, but I think maybe that's just because it's another in a line of cases that are discouraging. Justice doesn't come for the victims, and the probable perpetrators are allowed to live their lives as though nothing has gone on. They're in new relationships, have new families, and in some cases, I think they've gotten away with murder. If anyone listening has information about Kadie's case, please contact the Berkeley County Sheriff's Department. In fact, if you think that Kadie's case needs to be investigated again, contact them as well. Maybe if there are enough mosquitoes buzzing in their ear, they'll do something about it. Thank you so much for being here. I am consistently astonished that people listen to my rambling, and I appreciate you all more than you know. I've been doing a lot of thinking about what direction I want to take the channel next year, and if I can ever defuddle my befuddled brain, I'll let you know what's in store. I'll be back soon with more true crime. Until then, stay safe and be happy.